Radio.
Well, it is that time of the year again, the time of the year when I rant about how great the Heroes of Might and Magic games were. Some of them. Let's face it, one is sort of completely pointless because everything in it was done better in 2. 5's okay. Heira-shan, I hope it blows up. 6, let's not talk about 6 and haven't really heard any great things about 7. And because I already talked about 4, I know I already talked much about 2, that leaves the most popular one to talk about, doesn't it? At least for now, for this year. Next year I'm gonna do 5, the year after maybe 6, but this year I'm gonna do 3. But I'm not the only one making shows about heroes right now. Our good friend Stefan on his channel Complete Nonsense is gonna have a show out this week about Heroes of Might and Magic 2 and what that game meant to him. So go check that out as well. Not really sure how to approach this situation with Heroes 3, because on the one hand it is the best game in the series. On the other, it is a game to which I have a relation that's a bit complex. If you ever want to start by not really loving a game that's supposed to be great and amazing and superb, try playing it on a system that can't really run it. And I mean can't really run it in the worst ways possible. I ran Chrome, not the browser, the game. On a PC they could barely run it at 1 frame a second most of the time. I had to stare at the floor constantly in the jungle levels because if I looked at the horizon, I'd get under a frame a second. But I finished that game and I thought it was okay. Sure, glad it worked better in the other environments. But Heroes 3 had a few issues. I played it for the first time on a computer that could not really do 800 by 600 in terms of resolution. Well, the computer could, but the monitor would not properly display the image. I once set it to 1024 by 768 and it blew up. No joke, it started throwing off sparks and went poof. So as a replacement I got a loaner that could do resolutions of over 2K, which just goes to show that monitor technology in terms of resolution really went backwards a few years ago and we're just climbing back up. The main issue with Heroes of Might and Magic 3 running at that resolution is that the entire image does not fit on the screen, namely the bottom and the right part of the screen, where you find things like menus and the highly important bar that shows you how many resources you still have at your disposal, and oh yeah, the weekday. Also because it ran on a really old PC, well not ancient, but it was still a 24 megabytes of RAM, 133 megahertz processor. No matter what speed I set it to, it would run slowly, especially the animations. The characters in this game in combat are obsessed with turning around when they're hit from the back, and they would turn around so slowly, and I mean slowly. It just made every fight drag on and on and on until the end of time. So what I'm saying is that it wasn't playable properly when I first got the chance to enjoy it, and that sort of a bit colored my impression of the game for a while. That was ages ago. Since then, other things have colored my impression of it. Well, two major things have colored my impression of it. One is the art style. It tries its best to emulate the Might and Magic 6, 7, and well, 8, though 8 wasn't yet released, style. And in some ways that is fantastic because some of the cities just look amazing. And we got that hint of photorealism because the sky's a picture and buildings that look just right. It's superb, but it's like they don't all fit. Mostly because some of them were made kind of in a hurry, because of a thing we're gonna get to soon. The units, however, they look like they're cut out from the sprites of creatures from Might and Magic 6 and 7, but with much lower resolution and really unrefined edges. They always seemed to me like the transparency wasn't doing its job properly, and you would see bits of them that looked like a contour. They weren't just good looking, but they were trying to be realistic. And they had better animations than in Heroes 2, though mostly I played with them at the maximum speed and the animations sort of just looked kind of funky. I think it's that build-up of trying to be more realistic in the way that things are depicted and yet not succeeding. It's an uncanny valley effect mixed with the fast forward animations that really sank it in my eyes in terms of visual appeal. That and the fact that somehow, even though it uses 65,000 colors, everything looks a bit muddy and dirty, not all that pristine and clean like you would see in Heroes 2. It was a more grimy fantasy in some places, whereas Heroes 2 had a clear, unified aesthetic. Wasn't meant to be real, wasn't meant to be accurate, wasn't meant to depict anything that should move in a way that you think they would move. And yeah, the dragons look badass as hell. Not a line out of place because everything was drawn with that resolution perfectly. Here, alpha blending, stuff. Still, the units have better design than 5, where the vampires used swords. But again, I'm gonna talk about that probably next year. And the second problem I had with it is the sheer amount of spam. There is such a thing maybe as having too much content, and after 2 expansions, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 had too much of it in my opinion. I can't even list the amounts of elementals in it. Magic elementals, physics elementals, mind elementals I think there were at one point. The sheer amount of golems with diamonds, with no rust. I was gonna say rust golem, but no, rust is the dragon. There's fury dragons and azure dragons. The azure dragon is actually one I like, but there's so many others that it sort of cheapens the value of a dragon. 3 was already kind of a lot. They just hammered in units to the point where you kind of get the sense that some of them are not really all that balanced. They're just there to fill space. I think people will say that the devils kind of suck. Don't know if they're right or not. I haven't really dug into the Inferno faction all that much during the time I've played Heroes 3. I mostly just stuck to things like the Academy, Haven, a bit of Rampart. Can't say as I like the Fortress, or that it's kind of called almost exactly the same as the Stronghold. Stronghold, Fortress, they're kind of the same thing. I mean, differentiate between them a bit. And then you have the conflux. But those are my main issues with the game. Other than that, it is amazing. So let's begin where I should have actually began this show. What is Heroes 3? In the year 1999, great year, had a superb eclipse back then. New World Computing released a game that would make so many people happy. Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Not only a sequel of the fantastic Heroes 2 from a few years ago, but also a sequel of the Might and Magic games that have had a rebirth in that interval, where they went from the stylings of World of Xen to more darker, more realistic approach with amazing level design and stupidity at many corners. Heroes of Might and Magic 3 was a major improvement on every aspect except the visual styling over the previous game. One of them was the focus on the story. Yeah, Heroes 2 had a campaign, absolutely. You could even choose at some points which missions to take. I think once or twice in one of the campaigns, or 2 of them. But for the most part, it wasn't really super in-depth with the story. I mean, you're just playing the same story from 2 sides, and depending on which one you believed was canon, that's the one that was true, though technically Roland's was true, and now you're gonna see the fallout from that. You're introduced to Queen Catherine Griffinheart, Roland's wife and queen of her own kingdom in Arathia, a kingdom that is now in ruins that you must somehow rebuild. And you would rebuild it over the course of many missions, each in their own individual mini-campaign, all tied to one another, all leading to a common goal. It was a progression. It was more akin to StarCraft than it was to Heroes or Warcraft or Command and Conquer, pretty much every other kind of strategy game that had a campaign up until then. Most of them used to have alternative campaigns. There wasn't a cohesive story. It was A or B. Now it's A, then B, and then C. Big difference. Also a bigger emphasis on individual characters, on the heroes that you would play as they would be represented in the story. That would actually be amplified to great effect in the expansions, especially the Shadow of Death. That's the one I really like because it connected to me very much. The first campaign in the Shadow of Death is that of Gem. Gem, like me, is a Heroes 2 veteran. We both fought side by side in the Succession Wars, and now the pity is we're moving to a new land to hopefully find some peace, only to be embroiled again in war. And I like the way that Gem, or should I say the people that wrote her, pointed out the differences between Heroes 2 and Heroes 3. Now that this was in the last expansion of Heroes 3, released a year after the game, it's kind of bizarre. I honestly think that this should have been the first mission of the game, in the base game, the Heroes 3. But still, it works. It absolutely works. I liked it. And you got people like Craig Hack, you had Sandro again. You got more of a sense that this was a world unto its own, with its own characters, its own stories. It wasn't just, well, let's face it, a big part of Heroes 2 were the references to World of Xen, to Might and Magic 3. You'd see them in the characters' names, you'd see them in the towns' names, some of the maps as well. They kind of looked a lot like those old maps from the RPGs. But this one was its own thing. Yeah, it was absolutely still tied into Might and Magic, but it was a direct tie. It was like its own capsule universe that was separated from the in-jokes, from the references. It was a more cohesive affair, if you will, in terms of world building. And that is absolutely something that I enjoy about this game. It's even a piece that I kind of liked in the Ubisoft games as well, even though it's had an ass-backwards way of doing things, where it would jump from one place in the story to another. You had to sort of look up on a wiki what was the order of the missions you were supposed to play them in, because God knows you couldn't do it. I'm gonna get to 6 in 2020. I only do one of these a year because it's tradition. And it wasn't just the story and world aspect that I enjoy about Heroes 3. It was the thousands of improvements they made on the simple way in which you play. You know what was really annoying about Heroes of Might and Magic 2? Items. You would have to make a character that was just an inventory slot for your main characters. Someone on which you would deposit items you no longer needed, but maybe you would not want to completely throw away, or you deposit all the cursed items on and then send the fight an enemy with no army so the enemy would get it. Heroes 3 solved all this by giving your heroes a proper inventory with a space that could hold an unlimited number of items that you were not using, that would have no effect on you. And you would also have slots on your character, like visible on their body, of places where you could put items. I think there were less of them than in Heroes 2, and they were more purposeful. For example, you couldn't have 50 swords, or not 50, but you couldn't have 8 swords, all giving you amazing bonuses to attack. You could only carry one weapon. You could have a bunch of trinkets, you could have an armor, a helmet, not 50 of them, well, again, not 50, but not 5 of them, a bunch of rings. You were bound to create a character that was more focused, more natural. And what they did with the characters, it's still the greatest single idea they ever had with the series. Well, no, it's one of the greatest ideas they ever had with the series. The other great idea was the one they had in Heroes 4. But where Heroes 4 failed at the characters was they missed out on this. Each of them has an innate different trait that gives them a bonus in some aspect. They could generate some money on their own without having an estate skill. They could be able to upgrade a creature, Jelukor I believe, and some other guy, to upgrade a creature to a higher level, like beyond its initial upgrade. They could give bonuses to creatures. They would have pre-learned spells, like powerful ones. Everybody played with Solar and Chain Lightning, because he not only had it from the get-go, from level 1, where he could cast it once, but he also had a bonus to the damage it did. He had a reason to look for different characters and play with specific ones. They were also differentiated now in terms of their subclass in the faction they were in, because after all, this was Might and Magic. So even the Knight Castle, which is the heaven now, not necessarily Knight, would have a Might-focused character and a Magic-focused character with different statistics and different attributes. Many more attributes, I mean many more skills. You would have individual skills with multiple levels for each type of magic. For fire magic or wind magic. Well, they had elemental magic. There was no light or dark magic. That wasn't the fourth one. Again, I think the fourth one did it better. And these would also give bonuses to your spells. They defined a bit better the role of some factions, like the barbarians, who they're meaner magic, me dum-dum. So they didn't have a spellcaster variant, but they did have big bad creatures like behemoths, or like combinations of claws and teeth with fur. I still gonna have nightmares of going to Elfol, I believe, in Heroes of Might and Magic 7, that tunnel that was just filled with behemoths. Oh god, that was so... Yeah. You now had more factions and a whole lot of creatures, and I mean a whole lot of creatures, and all of them had an upgraded version. Now people will complain that Riddler 3 overdid it by giving every unit an alt ability, an alt fire if you will. I still kind of feel the same about Heroes 3, it just kind of went too far. but I've already covered this. One thing that I do like is that they expanded the army size, so that now you could actually fit all your creatures. There were even more creatures, more levels of creature, unless I forgot how to count, in Heroes 3 than there were in 2. You had more to choose from, and you also have more buildings and towns that could do more things, which I loved. And you could bring all the creatures into the battle. You wouldn't leave out the boars anymore, is what I'm saying. Never really did take the boars with me in Heroes 2. Once I got those titans, boars stayed in town, never left, never recruited them, they just stood there. Because why would I need them? I had 3 ranged units, a speedy bird, and some golems. Steel golems, like they used to make them in the old days. Not golems, which I believe was planned for a different expansion. Or at least probably was added in the Wake of Gods. But what's important is that the basic idea of the game was the same. Actually, no, it wasn't the same, it was enhanced, it was improved. Heroes 3 felt even more like you were playing an RPG in a strategy game world that's based off an RPG world, because you had quests this time. Actual quests you could complete inside of a map, even a random one. There were usually quests like, get that item, but still there were quests. And what I loved, you had more than one item that was made up of smaller items. Yeah, that was in one of the expansions, but still, it's something that I really thought that Heroes of Might and Magic 2 could have done more with. They only had the Battle Garb of Enduran, which was in the expansion made by Cyberlore, and you had more buildings to interact with, and I think that did give it a bit more of a sense that you were in an RPG world. You're not just a map, you were in the world of Might and Magic 6 and 7, and the music did help sell that. It was the same kind of music that the Might and Magic games had at the time, a more operatic style. Heroes 2 also had an operatic style, but it was a different kind of style than what you had seen in World of Xeen and the at least MIDI versions of Heroes 2. Also, it had a bunch of stock music. It had a lot of musical stings. There were sound effects in Heroes 2 when you could pick up things and get stuff, but Heroes 3 had musical stings, and again, some of them were freeware, like non-licensed music. But it helped sell its style. I loved it. Not as much as Heroes 2, because Heroes 2 is perfect, and regardless of how false that would be, and I know it's false, I still believe it, it's ingrained enough into my being, so that even if I know it's false, I'm still gonna love it as if it weren't. It's like when a parent knows their child is an absolute failure, they will still love them as if they weren't, even though they are. Heroes 3 would go on to massive success. Like I said, it had 2 expansions. One of them, Armageddon's Blade, was actually supposed to continue the story of Might and Magic 7, but unlike what Heroes 3 did, it wasn't going to continue with the good ending. It was going to go from the bad ending, where instead of using the power of the ancients to explore new worlds and seek out new life and strange civilizations, to boldly go where no Erathians had gone before, it would continue from the ending where you started building weapons, blasters, Naga tanks. And here's the bit where I absolutely hate the community of Heroes 3 and have no respect for anybody that claims to be a part of it. The community of Heroes 3 started making us think, oh, you can't have sci-fi in a Might and Magic game. What is this? Might and Magic? They felt that it would ruin the game. Destroy it. So they complained and sent death threats. In 1999, that was kind of a novel thing back then. Now we have Twitter for that. But back then you had to put in effort. You had to log into their servers on their forums or send them emails. And they axed the faction, the Foundry, I think it was called faction, that was supposed to be a version of the races of Might and Magic corrupted by the technology of the Ancient that wasn't supposed to really be used for that kind of stuff. Also meant changing the story a bit and axing the faction and replacing it with Conflux, which, if you ever wonder why Conflux is such a clusterfuck that doesn't seem to really fit well, it's kind of janky in places, doesn't look right, it's because of that they just slapped together in what time they had left and shipped it. But hey, I guess that's how it goes. Never know how it would have been. Well, people have tried to make mods with the Foundry faction, but what the original would have been like, I would have loved to see it. I would have loved to have seen it. Would it have really destroyed Might and Magic? Well, Heroes of Might and Magic? I highly doubt it. I mean, World of Xeen did well with all the sci-fi elements. maybe in some way they're right. In Heroes of Might and Magic never showed any sci-fi elements, but it doesn't mean they couldn't change, they couldn't add new things. They added rust dragons, they added mucus elementals. Probably, I think it's a Wake of Gods creature. Probably is. I know they had blood dragons. Come on, blood. Oh, God. Stop with the spam. I really hated you with spam. At least if they added gnome vampires, yeah, that would have been something, but just different elemental magic is an element. They should have added just an elemental. This is just an elemental made out of other elementals, all of them. That would have been something. And that wasn't actually the end for Heroes 3. They also had the Chronicles series. They were a bit easier to play. They were aimed at more casual people, and they were focused a lot more on story than on the challenge of playing them. And they added a lot of characters and stories, and I kind of sort of remember playing them. I think one of them had oh yeah, this was the one where they added the clouds. I think maybe the clouds were in Shadow of Death as well. It would have different kind of terrain types that were a lot more colorful. Oh, and speaking of terrain types, I completely forgot to mention the underground because it's a big thing. The maps now had underground levels. Totally forgot about it. But yeah, that was a big change for Heroes 3. It basically doubled the map size. Doubled it. And of course, the base game would get a remake by Ubisoft years ago. They didn't have the source code for the expansions, so those did not get remastered. I don't own that, so can't really say much about it. I think most people were disappointed they had to pay a little bit of money for basically a third of the game that they've owned for years and years and years. Considering how many mods there are for it, it seemed like a pointless affair, which would actually be a good way to describe Ubisoft's attempt to handle the Might and Magic franchise in its own way. A pointless affair, because they're gonna screw it up. They have so many times. They made Bejeweled Fighters, or what, Puzzle Heroes, well, Clash of something, Might and... the DS one. I forgot what it's called, probably for the better. So in short, Heroes 3 is fantastic. I just kinda wish it looked like 2. There's a mod that makes it look completely like it, basically remakes 2 and 3. I haven't actually played it. I've been meaning to play it for 5 years, I think. I probably will one day. Maybe next year. Though next year we're doing 5. And if you're not sure why I make these once a year, it's because I'm celebrating the first time I ever played Heroes of Might and Magic 2, which was, oh god, it was 16 years ago. So long ago. More than half my life. Well, at least it's more. I'm gonna see you again soon with, well, we have shows every day. We have streams on and off on a semi-regular basis on DLive, which you should totally join up on. It's like YouTube, but we don't get censored or algorithmed to death if we say nasty things about certain corporations being horrible. And of course, if you're in the comments, and I've got to say, I've loved some of the comments I've been seeing lately on the video. Like, I've seen people write gigantic posts. Good job. I love to see that kind of engagement from you folks. That's superb. Glad to have you on board. And I look forward to reading what you have to say about Heroes 3. Also, later this week, you're gonna have more of it. Well, not just Heroes 3, but more Heroes. It's gonna be a surprise, I think. Unless this got already posted. I'm not sure. Time is strange. Goodbye.